Welcome, everybody, to the Mormon Newscast. We're so glad you're here and joining us tonight. Tonight is September 22nd, 2025. I'm joined by only one of my cohorts tonight, Rebecca Biblioteca. How are you doing this evening?
I am fantastic. I'm getting over a fall cold. And as I understand it, RFM is beginning his fall cold, and that's why he's not with us. And I kind of thought, okay, if he's not going to be here, should we do what the apostles do with President Nelson? And that's quote RFM all night, kind of call him our beloved RFM, or should we just kind of talk about him behind his back? I don't know. We'll see how it goes.
I'll be happy to quote him. Mormonism makes liars of us all. So with that, we will excuse RFM tonight. He's a little under the weather, but we have a great show lined up. Rebecca has some great stories to share. There's our thumbnail, folks. Tonight's stories: a cross on Temple Square, church purchase in Hawaii, Moroni Day, Hill Cumorah rededicated. I think they also did some renovations there as well. LDS Church gives water back. We've been covering some water stories where they've been taking it. Now they're giving it back. LDS Church's president, Nelson, immortalized with new hymn that he wrote himself. So this will be interesting. Heber Valley Temple, big update. And then bad publicity out, good publicity in. And with that, we'll start with Rebecca Biblioteca with a cross on Temple Square.
I have to say that I thought not a lot could shock me in Mormonism, but this shocked me. And I'm calling this "What is Going On at Temple Square?" I probably could have said "What the heck" or "What the hell is going on at Temple Square?" But I'm going to talk about two new statues that are already in place on Temple Square that nobody seems to really know anything about, unless maybe you have happened to go on Temple Square. You can see this one here. This is supposed to be Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. People have kind of made the joke, he looks like, oh, I've got a migraine. It's kind of an interesting angle of the statue. So I don't know. We'll have to wait till more pictures come out. But this next one, I'm going to move the slide to. Now, I have to set the scene here. I came across a post of this picture and the one you're looking at here in the middle of the night. You know, I've got a cold. I'm up at night. I'm scrolling my phone, like literally 3 a.m. And I saw it. I'm like, oh, ha ha. Somebody says this is on Temple Square. I spent a long time like trying to research, look up articles, trying to find pictures. Couldn't find it anywhere. I finally decided this isn't real. In the morning, I'll message the person who posted it and see where they got it, if they're mistaken. I was sure they were mistaken. And when I did message this person, they're like, oh no, here is the church website where they show you a picture of this. So this is what I'm talking about, everybody. This is a cross on Temple Square. I wish we had some music. Dun, 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 dun. What do you think of this, Bill?
It is a strange thing because Mormonism has gone out of its way to declare that the cross is not a symbol of Christ in the LDS Church. And so you and I and RFM and others in this space have had to deal with quite a bit of change in the church. I think everybody's had to deal with that. And we noticed the softening up, the trying to look more mainstream Christian. But even I think it was Elder Holland not too long ago that mentioned the cross again, that it wasn't a symbol of our faith. We've had the old story that if you it's similar to having a bullet around your neck if your son was shot with a gun.
Yeah.
So we've had these things in Mormonism. This is a subtle way, I think, because it's not, it's Christ carrying the cross. It's not the cross just standing there on its own. This is a subtle way, and I think just one more little step heading that direction.
Yeah, I agree with you. And you're absolutely right. It is not a cross with Christ on the cross. That, I think we all would have had a heart attack over that one. But I'll show you a little bit of background. Like I said, I did not believe this was really on Temple Square when I first saw it until I messaged the person who had come across it. Now, where it is you can go to the Salt Lake Temple and they have pictures about the I wanted to say restoration. It is the restoration and the renovation. And if you scroll down through those pictures, you will see here on the right, it's just there with some other pictures of different things that they're renovating. Now, what's interesting is there have been 4 new statues within the last 12 months on Temple Square that have been erected. And we've talked about each one, I think, on the newscast. And here are the different ones. The 5 virgins. Remember, we talked about that one. We talked about Joseph seeing Moroni because everybody said Dad bod Moroni. The first vision that was there, and then one of Christ calling his apostles, as their fishermen. But each one of those statues had an article that accompanied it in either the church news, LDS Living, Deseret News, where it says new statue unveiled and pictures of it. So these two statues, the Garden of Gethsemane and Jesus with the cross, I can't find any kind of article or notification about this. And apparently the pictures on the church website were taken on the 19th. So it's been there for a little while, but no official notification. And one says the cross is going to be over by the East Visitor Center, and then the Gethsemane is going to be by the West. Because if you're not familiar with the renovation, there's the temple, and now there are two different visitor centers in front of the temple. One is actually a perpetual open house, meaning it looks like a temple inside. And it is a temple inside that can be dedicated and undedicated. Very interesting. But yeah, these statues are there. Apparently they are already there, according to this information here. So I just thought that was absolutely fascinating that without pomp or circumstance or drawing attention, these were put up. And maybe I'm a conspiracy theorist. Maybe there's nothing to it. But I do think that these statues would... Well, I feel like almost all apostles and prophets, except for our current ones, would be spinning in their graves. Don't you think, Bill? I mean, it's a huge change.
Yeah. And I'll add, think about this from what they're able to convey doing this. You put this on Temple Square. So every Mormon who lives in Utah and visits downtown Salt Lake City, at least every once in a while, will have an opportunity to see that, Mormonism doesn't mind the cross anymore. And all we have to do is just wait a generation. And then everybody will go, no, Mormons are great with crosses. No big deal. They're already selling them. I think Deseret Book maybe sells like cross necklaces and stuff like that too.
They draw the line there. What they have is a necklace called the Empty Tomb necklace. Okay. And it's kind of a dome, and then it has it looks like a taco, but they're definitely trying to represent, in a Christian way. But I'm sure you're right. I see younger LDS people wearing crosses all the time, and I'm sure it's only a matter of time before it's sold at Deseret Book. There was an article last year that came out that said Temple Square is getting 14 new sculptures. And here are the first two. This was last year. And why 14 is important? Here I go with my conspiracy theory. If you've ever heard of Stations of the Cross, this is a sort of a Catholic devotion thing where there are 14 different phases of the things that happened to Jesus during the last week of his life. Here they are. Here's a picture of them. And each one is kind of a little devotion, but the 14 things that happened during that week. And we have seen in the last 2 years, stake centers putting on what the LDS Church is calling stages of the cross, where here's some invites to that, where you go into a stake center, you go room to room, and you see different things that happened during that last week. This is a very Catholic tradition. I mean, it's solid. They've been doing this forever. And now my conspiracy theory is that on Temple Square, they're trying to set up sort of the Stations of the Cross, but they're also interweaving into that things from the Restoration. So you're going to have Christ in his cross, but then you're going to have the natural progression to here's the angel Moroni. So it's all going to kind of be blended into a Christian Restoration type of a display, which, I think that's probably pretty brilliant. Like you said, Bill, people will visit and not really notice. You know what I mean?
If you go back just to spend 2 seconds on this, if you go back in Mormon history, we've talked about this before, and I know that we've done episodes in content creation in the space before on this, but the cross was a common thing in early Mormonism. It wasn't until, long after the founding of the church. For instance, I think that's a daughter of Brigham Young who's wearing a cross around her neck. You've got a cross on one of the editions of the Doctrine and Covenants. You've got a cross on one of the early buildings in the church. This is the Death Branch Chapel in Ogden, Utah, with one of several crosses. And these are a bunch of early Latter-day Saints wearing cross necklaces. So the cross was, seen as just a general Christian symbol utilized within Mormonism as well. And it wasn't until later on that one of the leaders, I don't remember who it was, but one of the leaders later on made it a big deal that was no longer a thing. And I know David O. McKay emphasized it, but I think it originated just before him.
Yeah, and it was a big deal. And I tell my own experience and story over and over just because I don't want it to die, right? The idea that when I was 16, I had a boyfriend that was not a member. He gave me a cross necklace earring set, and my mom actually yanked it. I don't think she meant to, but kind of pulled it off me. We don't wear crosses. So it was a real thing. I'm sure somebody would say, "Oh, you guys misunderstood," but we didn't misunderstand. We
Mhm.
didn't have anything to do with the cross and the death. It was all about the resurrection. So it all just kind of points to trying to become more mainstream, I think, and especially Temple Square, very geared toward visitors, not of our faith. And members are just going to have to deal with it. If they're shocked, they're just going to have to get on board. So I made this joke because I went and visited my mom's grave literally this weekend to put some fall flowers on it. And I do feel like she was probably spinning. And I asked my faithful family members that were with me, what do you think she would have thought of this? And they're like, oh, she would have had a huge problem with it, because she was raised in that era, like you described, Bill, where we did not have anything to do with the cross. But one last little thing, speaking of, trying to become more mainstream, this picture on the left was taken by our friend Ganesh Sharian at the Independence, Missouri Visitor Center. And he said, is that my imagination, or does this Christus look different? And so, of course, I had to Google it. I had to look at it. The one on the right, you'll recognize is the one that was in the Salt Lake Center Visitor Center, the very famous replica. But look at the one on the left. It's just kind of looking right at you. Here, I'll do a close up, kind of smiling at you, kind of has this anvil chin, even under a beard, and these eyes, and his hands are kind of out. People have said jazz hands. And I don't know, people have been making a lot of comments as I posted this. Here's another one from Rome. So the visitor center there, they're definitely moving away from that solemn, Christus looking down, and there's just Jesus coming right at you, which I don't know if that's more Christian, less Christian. A lot of people say we're headed toward, from dogma, buddy Jesus. And that may be it, but maybe it's all to become more accessible, right? To make Christ accessible, which he never really was in the LDS church till recently. They're trying hard. Anyway, final thoughts. That's the end of my segment on that.
I feel if we can get to this Jesus, we've probably made some good changes in the church.
A thumbs up from Jesus. Yeah, I'll take that any day.
Yep, you got it. All right. Well, with that story, the next one that we've got is a thing about some land in Hawaii. So I'm going to just switch the slides over here. LDS Church buys old Cam drive-in lot for $60 million. The LDS Church has purchased the old Cam drive-in lot, a 14-acre property, and I'm not going to be able to say that, but I'll try, off Kamehameha Highway in Hawaii for $60 million in early September, according to public records. The lot has been sitting unused for decades. It's hard to believe that a piece of land is worth $60 million and sat empty for as long as it did. And it's Hawaii, where land is such a premium. The lot has been sitting unused for decades, and the acquisition marks a significant investment in land formerly idle. It remains unclear exactly what the church plans to do with the site. Local residents and neighborhood boards are watching closely. Now, this is what caught my eye. The local residents and neighborhood boards are watching closely for proposals, zoning changes, or development plans that might follow. Everybody, after all these temple fiascos, everybody now watches closely when the church buys a piece of land. Critics are asking whether the purchase will deliver community benefits or simply hold potential land for future leverage. Again, land in Hawaii worth $60 million today is probably worth $120 million in 10 years. So it'll be interesting to see what the church does with this. The church is always up for buying more land, aren't they?
Well, they are. And of course, the Honolulu temple was announced, right? So people are kind of speculating this might have something to do with this. And yeah, when you said it sat dormant for all those years, I thought, well, maybe it was owned by an LDS member. But in that case, they would have donated it. They would not have sold it, right? The church would not have had to purchase it. So yeah, and it just warms my heart to hear that, that the citizens are going to be aware, they're going to watch, they're going to pay attention as things start to happen. That was my one goal. And I think Landon, my co-host on Mormonish, one goal, following temples and revealing the playbook, was just when a temple comes to your town, just pay attention. Maybe it's going to be great and you're going to love it and it's going to follow all the codes and zoning, but just be a citizen that's aware. That's all we were hoping to accomplish. And when I hear things like that, I think, you know what? I think just getting that word out there with the 5 major temples that we have been covering over the last 2 years, I think that happens. I think people now kind of know what to look for. So we will watch too, won't we, Bill? This will be interesting.
It has got to be a good day. Again, take the church out of it. It has to be a good day for a person or a company who owns land in Hawaii, but has owned it for decades. So decades ago, what was this land worth? Nothing near 60 million. And whoever that person or company is today, they got quite the windfall from that. So what a great day for them. And talking about great days, not only do we have Pioneer Day in Utah, it looks like now we have Moroni Day. Is that true, Rebecca?
Oh my goodness. I remember we discussed this last year too, because this holiday is just taking off. I know people like tend not to believe me on things like this, but it really is. And this is, of course, it's as RFM pointed out, it's not a day, it's kind of 2 days, right? It's a 24-hour period, the 21st, the equinox, and the 22nd. And of course, this is when Moroni or Nephi, but probably Moroni, visited Joseph Smith, in his chambers at night and came back several times. And of course, I had to make a meme where he's got one of those, birthday little things, and a hat on. But there are actually advertisements, encouragements to celebrate it, Moroni Day. So I think Bill's going to play a little bit of a clip. This was from Scripture Central. It was a longer segment, but this is kind of the end of it, where they're encouraging you to bake a cake, have a family celebration, invite your neighbors. It's Moroni Day.
And I just have to note before I push the play button, you asked me to be able to play this. So I went to Facebook and clicked on the link that you sent me, and it was just a dead link for me. You had no problem getting into it. I have to suppose that behind the scenes, Scripture Central made sure that Bill Reel cannot get into their Facebook group.
And probably me too now that they're going to see this. But yeah, and they, if you remember several years ago, there was a big Moroni Day fundraiser dinner that Landon and I were given tickets to, really expensive, where an apostle was going to be speaking. And then we were, kicked out and let back in and kicked out. But that's really the first time I knew that people were formally celebrating Moroni Day. And it's only, gathering traction and steam more and more every year since.
Well, here it is, Moroni Day.
We invite you to join us all worldwide, wherever we might be, toasting Moroni and having a wonderful piece of cake together. Happy Book of Mormon Day, Moroni.
There it is. And that's just a little segment of it. It began with, and this gentleman was a 70, and he talked about visiting a stake, and a young woman was so excited to show him a picture of a Moroni Day cake that he had made. And I think last year when we talked about this, we talked about how we would celebrate. We could dress up like Moroni, spray paint yourself gold. We could exchange presents, wake our family members up 4 times during the night to do this. There were all kinds of ideas that we came up with. So if you all have any ideas of how to celebrate Moroni Day, put them in the chat. I'd be curious.
There you go. Well, there's Moroni Day. So there's that. What do we got going on here, Rebecca? This is what's going on over at the Hill Cumorah. Now, not the actual Hill Cumorah, the hill that isn't the Hill Cumorah, but got named the Hill Cumorah, because that hill's somewhere else, obviously.
Oh my goodness. It's so confusing. And I tried to wrap my head around it, but most of you are familiar with the site that probably when all of us were growing up was the only Hill Cumorah, if you're as old as I am or close, right? Not, the second one or like a second shooter. There's a second hill. No, this is the Hill Cumorah where the pageant used to take place. I'm sure a lot of you probably even attended that before that was discontinued, but there has been a whole renovation project there at the Hill Cumorah for a number of years. Finally, finished up, and Elder Bednar is the one that was able to go there, and he's going to dedicate the refurbished Hill Cumorah site, right? So it says Elder David A. Bednar of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles dedicated the refurbished Hill Cumorah historic site in Palmyra, New York. And of course, this was done on Sunday, on Moroni Day, right? Of course, that's absolutely appropriate. And it says this is where Joseph Smith was visited in 1820s by an angel named Moroni and given the gold plate, which contained the record now known as the Book of Mormon. And I did a little informal poll. When you hear Hill Cumorah, what's the first thing that comes to your mind, Bill? Do you think great battles, or do you think found the plates?
That where the plates were found.
That's what you think. Yeah.
Yep.
And that's what it seemed to be kind of age related, but I always thought great battles, and maybe I just, was into the romance and the drama of all of that. But yeah. And we'll talk about how that's really not a thing anymore there at all. So in his dedicatory prayer, there were 500 people that attended, special guests, and then it was broadcast worldwide. And he dedicated the site as a place of holy remembrance, heavenly inspiration, heartfelt appreciation, and a place of seeking and learning and humble reverence. And there's a picture of Elder Bednar as he stands up and talks to everybody. And the article goes on to say, it's the story of Joseph Smith and how he retrieved the golden plates from the site. But the golden plates became the Book of Mormon-ish, right? Sort of, they did, yeah. And they testify of Jesus Christ. And the history, the thread that kind of puts it all together from the time that Moroni buries the plates to when Joseph retrieves them, and then the stories we know that are the Book of Mormon. So what I'm trying to point out from that is they pretty much leave out everything I was raised with, which was the final battle, the drama of it, and then Moroni burying the plates, right? They're just kind of picking up right there where Moroni buries the plates. And there's a reason for that, I think. And you can probably guess what that is, Bill. Any guesses why they're not going there?
Why they're not going where?
To the battles. Why is that no longer a part of Hill Cumorah like it was when I was growing up?
The reason I was not sure what you would ask, because I was going into my YouTube channel trying to find the old episodes that RFM and I had done on the Hill Cumorah and the second Hill Cumorah and the second Watson letter.
Yep.
The church, up until a certain moment, there was no ifs, ands, or buts. By the way, when Joseph Smith and David Whitmer and Oliver Cowdery meet Moroni on the road as they're all in a carriage, and this old homeless guy is holding like a satchel over his back, and Joseph Smith says, "That's Moroni," that person tells Oliver Cowdery or David Whitmer, "I'm heading to Cumorah." So it's come straight out of the mouth of Moroni. But what you're pointing to is that up until a certain moment, there was always just one Hill Cumorah, the hill where the battles took place, the hill where also the plates were discovered. But in the modern moment, we all acknowledge there's nothing in that hill that is not the place where battles of millions took place. So the hill must be somewhere else. Hence, a second hill has been invented down in Central America, and that's the hill where the battles took place.
But even that, according to the church, and I'll show you some quotes later, that's not even really a thing. So there is, let's see, here we go. There's a monument that has been refurbished and is still there. And I was talking to my friend Rob Lauer, who was the director of the Hill Cumorah pageant for like 12 or 15 years. I can't remember. He was deeply immersed in all of that. And he was reminding me that there used to be, and I'm sure they're not there anymore, markers by this statue that said, this is the place of the battle. It talked about the battle. So it went from battle to burial to discovery. That was the trajectory there. And that part is all gone. And I never thought about that's probably why they don't have the Hill Cumorah pageant anymore.
Yeah, it is.
Because, the Hill Cumorah pageant, and I checked with my friend who was the director there, the whole last part of it, I've never gone. Have you gone, Bill? Is the huge battle. You've been there then. So you've seen it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's a battle, and it ends with the burial of the plates. That narrative, they have distanced themselves completely from that. All they want you to remember is that this is where Joseph Smith said that he, see, so what do they mention? What don't they mention? Again, they do not mention the battle. They do only talk about retrieving the plates. That other part of the narrative is completely gone. And one of the main reasons, I think, and this was actually brought up in several articles, not church articles, but other sources, as they talked about this dedication, is we're talking about, what does it say on the church's website about Book of Mormon geography? Or what does it say about the Hill Cumorah itself? And this is what it says. It says the church does not take a position on the specific geographic locations of the Book of Mormon events in the ancient Americas. Speculation on the geography of the Book of Mormon may mislead instead of enlighten. Such a study can be distraction from its divine purpose.
They don't take a position anymore about where it took place.
Yep, anymore. Hence, the pageant's gone, the markers are gone. And they also say, while the church does not take a position on the specific geographic location of the Book of Mormon events in the ancient Americas, records kept by Joseph Smith and his contemporaries make it clear that this hill is the place where Joseph Smith met with Moroni and where Joseph received the plates. So the hard stop on that narrative with the battles and the burial, we don't know how the plates got there. Maybe Moroni wandered thousands and thousands of miles, like the movie The Oath. Remember that, Bill?
Yeah.
Yeah, RFM, I think it was his favorite movie. Or maybe they were teleported, transported. Nobody knows. But everything that Elder Bednar is rededicating right now is starting at the narrative where Joseph found the plates. And the last thing I just want to mention about that is let's talk about the trees. So this is what the Hill Cumorah looks like right now. And they said, let me get to my next page of notes here. Oops, back here. Sorry. It says in many photographs of the hill, we see a bare Hill Cumorah, but during Joseph's time, it was forested. Or was it forested? I mean, that's what I was trying to find out. And it probably needs more research, maybe even a whole episode of Mormonism Live. But I do know that the church has made an effort in the last couple of years to plant a whole bunch of trees. They had missionaries go out there, plant them from seeds, not saplings, so they'll be stronger, and reforest the entire hill, supposedly to go back to looking what it looked like when Joseph Smith would have been there. So what's interesting is that it was pretty bare, and I'm going to show you some pictures in a minute here. But back in 1928, a missionary and his wife were called there, and it was the Fighting Mormon. Do you know about this guy, Bill? There was a movie about, I think it was called The Fighting Preacher. I bet some of the people in the chat have heard of this, but he was a missionary couple, last name of Bean, William Bean, and he was a middleweight champion, and he was sent to the area to try to get to be friends with everybody. There was a lot of animosity about the church, as you can imagine, and the ultimate goal was to purchase the Hill Cumorah site because the church didn't own it. So I don't know if he went up to people and said, put them up, I'm going to knock your block off if you don't sell, but eventually he was able to get the sale to go through, and he arranged for all the trees to be put on Hill Cumorah, which is interesting. So the tree narrative from the church, I never thought I'd write the word tree narrative, but I did, is that in 1827, the church says it was forested and Joseph found the plates. Then treasure diggers, ne'er-do-wells, they tried to dig in the hill. They dug holes. The trees, just disappeared. Yes, Bill?
Every tree disappeared because the treasure diggers dug up the. I don't know.
That's one thing I read, that it was just people, they didn't take care of it. It just, the forest disappeared, basically, is what they're saying.
Forested.
So then we have in 1928, the Fighting Preacher, he reforests everything. Then the trees were cut down again for the infrastructure for the Hill Cumorah pageant, which started in 1935. You've got roads, outbuildings. I mean, it's a little city into itself, right? And then finally, in 2021, the trees are replanted to return everything to how it would have looked when Joseph Smith found the plates. But I don't know, because I did research and I reached out to some smart people. In Joseph Smith's era, the Hill Cumorah was not densely forested. Accounts suggest the hill had some trees, some brush, some undergrowth. Early sources say it was partially wooded. There were some thickets. There might have been some scattered trees. Here's another little chart kind of showing the trajectory of the trees. I know everybody definitely tuned in tonight to hear about the trees, but my point is kind of much like everything else in the church, they may be restoring something that was never originally there, if that makes sense. It's kind of a metaphor. So I reached out to my friend Dan Vogel because he knows everything. That's a shortcut. And he says, hi, Rebecca, see Cowdery, Oliver Cowdery's description, and it has the reference right there. The hill of which I have been speaking at the time mentioned presented a varied appearance. The north end rose suddenly from the plain, forming a promontory without timber, but covered with grass. So this is Oliver Cowdery, that it was pretty grassy and there were forest areas, but more on the sides. I mean, here are some pictures, from the late 1800s and the early 1900s. I feel like if I were standing kind of in town, I could look up there and see a bright glowing angel Moroni if I were looking up, right? If it really was that bare with the grass. So I just thought it was interesting. Here's, I think that was George Albert Smith dedicating the hill. Anyway, pretty dang bare, but now they are going to be reforesting everything to make it, they said, more of a sacred space. And my theory is that when you see it like that, it kind of looks, I don't know, like a curiosity, an oddity, kind of mystical, magical, maybe. And they just want to move away from that and get to just the spiritual, kind of like the grove, right? They just want it to be very solemn, and wooded trees will do that. It will give you that feeling. So I guess my bottom line or question is, are they restoring something that never was to begin with? Kind of like a lot of things in the church. I don't know. Any thoughts on trees, Bill?
I'll just say that I didn't expect a false narrative about trees. I know there's a lot of false narratives out there when it comes to this religion and the stories it tells, but this one here, you can see the horse and buggy. So this is not like 1970. This isn't Holmes County, Ohio, where the Amish are running around. So that hill looks pretty bare, and it's all the pictures you showed, all the ones I've ever seen indicate a fairly bare hill. Now, this one shows a few trees there up on the left, and you showed a couple of photos with a few extra trees there on the left side. But for the most part, it looks relatively barren. Now, what this does, if you remember the story, I mean, Smith gets the plates, hides them in a tree nearby, then has to go back and get them, bring them back into the home. He's chased by strangers. He gets his maybe finger broken or whatnot. That doesn't make a lot of sense if this is what it looked like. He could have just grabbed the plates and headed on home.
Yeah, and I feel like everybody in town could be sitting there eating popcorn going, oh, look, there's Joseph on. Oh, look, there's some kind of angel. Look at that. And again, I don't know for sure. Like Dan Vogel, he read that, gave me that quote from Oliver Cowdery, but I think maybe it was forested on one side, but I think it was pasture. So I'd like anybody to look into this, because it was a fun deep dive. It was pretty interesting to read the history of the area and the Hill Cumorah.
I think you make a great point. If Joseph went to that hill and got the plates, everybody in town goes, he's coming back with the plates right now.
Get him. Well, that's the attack 3 times narrative, right? So I don't know.
Yeah, that explains why he did it in the cover of darkness with a black horse. So that explains that. All right. Well, there's another picture or two.
I just couldn't stop it with the pictures. It was so interesting.
We've been sharing some stories recently about water levels in Utah and how those are going down. We had a story last week about how the church is, I don't want to call it fracking if that's what they're doing, but they're going to be pulling water out of the ground, putting it into the local river stream, letting it essentially run out of Utah. And so then we would essentially, as a state, lose lots of natural water that we have in our groundwater. But this is a positive story, and I want to give the church kudos for this. It's sort of strange that this is coming out right after we just covered a bunch of stories about them not being good stewards of the water in Utah. But in this instance, they are being a good steward. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has pledged a major contribution towards alleviating Utah's drought by leasing. I don't know what that means. Once you get, can you give it and taketh away? I don't know. But Utah's drought by leasing 10,000 acre feet of water, equivalent to about 3.26 billion gallons, from Utah Lake to be released into the Great Salt Lake via the Jordan River, flowing through Farmington Bay and Gilbert Bay. The donation is part of a broader collaborative effort with the Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District, the Great Salt Lake Watershed Enhancement Trust, and state agencies including Wildlife Resources, Forestry, Fire and State Lands, in conjunction with conservation partners like the Nature Conservancy and National Audubon Society. I'm going to take the comments off for just a second, folks. Beyond this single donation, the church is also doubling down on water conservation efforts in its facilities. We mentioned this a couple weeks ago as well, implementing water-wise landscaping at its meeting houses, and reaffirming its role in environmental stewardship during the drought. Officials say this latest effort builds on past annual contributions and is meant to reflect a commitment to responsible natural resource management, especially as Utah deals with worsening water scarcity. So kudos to the church for making, it says donation on one hand, but it's a lease of the water on the other. Leasing often involves some sort of contract and sometimes some sort of rent or leasing fee paid. I don't know what all the details are, but I'm going to strike it up to that's just semantics, and this is a clear donation of water back into the Great Salt Lake, and kudos to them for doing it. So bravo LDS Church on this one. So there's that story. Any thoughts on them putting the water back after taking it out?
Yeah, and I'm kicking myself because I did look into this the last time they'd done this, maybe like a year ago, and I did have this down. I remembered what leasing was, but I don't remember anymore. But I think it's like, it's not too much skin off their back, if you know what I mean. It is a really good faith effort, though, especially when there's a lot of scrutiny over water. Like, people drive past the church buildings and are like, why is your grass green and the sprinklers are on? So I think they definitely know there can be a lot of pushback on that. And who knows, it could have something to do with what's happening in Heber. And I hear there are some people podcasting about, water wastage or something. But yeah, it's a good thing just to try to save that Salt Lake. I went to sort of a blessing of the lake a couple years ago with Darren Perry, and we all poured water in, and he, said a blessing over the lake, and he's Shoshone, and everybody's trying so hard because we love that lake. So everybody, they're trying to help, and you're right. Kudos to them. I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, we all should do our part. And at least in this particular instance, the church is doing theirs.
Yep. I think so too. That's great. So, and let's see. Hymn. We're on to the, sorry, I thought we were going to water next. We're on the hymn. Okay, this is really interesting. So as we know, there's a new songbook, a hymn book for home and church. Everybody says, where's the actual hymn book? Well, that's not going to be available for 2 more years. The hymns are released about 12 at a time, so people can get used to singing them or not singing them and trying them out in their ward. We've seen things like This Little Light of Mine, right? And we've seen things like Amazing Grace, and everybody's going crazy because there's finally something new. And what's interesting about it is that the primary hymns and songs are released in the same way. They're all going to be in the same book. So, I was the primary pianist for a long time, and we had our own little songbook. That's not how it's going to be. It's going to be one book altogether. But this time it's extremely interesting because President Nelson has a hymn that he wrote himself, the lyrics, someone else wrote the music, that is going to be in the new hymn book, which is incredible. So 12 new songs come out, and one of them is written by President Nelson himself. I have to say, one of the songs I'm excited about is Go Tell It on the Mountain. Are you familiar with that song, Bill?
Go tell it on the mountain. Yeah.
Right there, you're already singing it probably 4 times faster than they will in the LDS wars, but I'm sure they'll try. That's right. So I know. Oh, the way they tried This Little Light of Mine. The problem is all of these songs are swing time, if you know what that is. And they have put them in the book straight time. Go tell it on the mat, without the, they'll try. I'm sure some of those choristers will be able to get in there and get the crowd going, hopefully. But anyway, so President Nelson, here is the list of all of the songs. The one that he has contributed is Our Prayer to Thee. And my co-host Landon made the joke, oh, maybe he wrote that when his plane was on fire and going down. I don't know if that's true or not, but I do know that he wrote it, I think in 2003 is when he wrote it. So it has been performed by, I think, the Tabernacle Choir and in some other places. It was published in the Ensign, but now, amazingly, it's in the hymn book. And that led me to try to figure out, has any other prophet or church leader ever had a hymn in the hymn book? Because this is pretty big, right? So I found an article called 25 Hymns You Didn't Realize Were Written by Prophets and General Authorities. And Parley P. Pratt was probably the most prolific hymn writer that we have in the hymn book. If you're bored during church, you find yourself in church, go up to the little, who wrote the hymn, and you might be surprised to find who was actually the author. So we have Bruce R. McConkie, Parley P. Pratt, Joseph Fielding Smith. Now, there's a prophet, right, who had a hymn in the hymn book. But again, he wrote this long before The Journey is Long. Remember that song? He was on his way somewhere and he wrote The Journey is Long. But it did not make it into the hymn book, when he was a sitting prophet. And this is what is different about President Nelson. A sitting prophet, the current prophet, and he has a hymn himself in the book. So Marion D. Hanks, John Taylor, Edward Partridge, just a list of people who have written hymns. Gordon B. Hinckley, and I bet you're not surprised to hear that the other modern day prophet that has a hymn in the hymn book is Gordon B. Hinckley. That's right. We all know.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me at all, does it?
Yeah. Yeah. And I kind of feel like, and I'm going to be watching this, it might not make it into the rest of the hymn book, right? This may be removed. That's my theory. But he wrote one called My Redeemer Lives. It's not the one that you're thinking of. But again, he wrote this early on, like in 1972. It was put in the hymn book in 1985. He was not the prophet yet. So I still say that President Nelson is the only actual prophet where they said, okay, we're going to put a hymn book in there for you. And I tried to find a picture of President Hinckley singing. The closest I could find is he's got some rhythm there as he's doing the Hosanna shout. I mean, that's kind of a chant. So here we have President Nelson. I did find a picture of him singing. This was his Christmas song that he sang right there. And this is an old article. So it says this song isn't included in the hymn book, but the inspiring message sends shows the type of life our prophet lived. And now it is in the hymn book. This is amazing. And here's another leader that wrote a hymn. We're talking about David A. Bednar. And I also couldn't find a picture of him singing. So I settled on a picture of him kind of creeping out a child. I thought maybe that would be similar. I don't know. But he's written a song called One by One. And I'm going to make a prediction right now that this makes it into the hymn book. Everybody watch for that. And my other prediction is that President Hinckley's song is taken out of the hymn book. That is my prediction for hymns going forward. What about you, Bill?
One by one, we make the children cry, huh? I love
That's it. That's it.
Yeah. I'm still stuck on the fact that Hinckley does it. And of course, Nelson's going to do it because Nelson has taken everything Hinckley's done and either turned it upside down or done it better.
Yep. One upmanship. That's it exactly. And it was funny because I went into the music library because I thought I better listen to it, and it's the kind of song that rhymes words like ransom and goodsome and uses words like exemplar, the kind of songs we love to sing that just roll off the tongue, right? But I pushed play and then I couldn't turn it off. Like I went into I was like, oh my God, it just kept playing and playing Nelson's song. I had to listen to the whole thing. I could not shut that thing off. So I've actually listened to the whole thing and I don't know if I'm better for it or not, but I have heard it. You can check it out in the Gospel Music Library.
I listened to it today as well. And it sounded like every other song in like the primary, it was just the piano doing like primary music.
It was very, Yep. Very, nothing super special, I think, but I do think they'll treat it very specially. And I think they'll say, today we're going to sing President Nelson's song. I think it'll get a lot of play. I think it'll get a lot of attention, like a celebrity song kind of.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right. Bednar's, I think, will end up in there as well.
I think so. I'm putting money on it right now. If anybody wants to bet on the hymns, I'll bet them.
Well, there's this one too. Is there something here?
Yeah, I just wanted to just give a little more information. So as of September 18th, the Hymns for Home and Church have released 60 songs. Isn't that interesting? In kind of groups of like 15 or 12. And the songs are in English. Notice the next most popular language, French. As we've all been talking about, French is becoming the predominant language of the LDS Church, and that's something to pay attention to. Portuguese and Spanish, with a total of 37 songs released in other languages, bringing the total number of songs to 97 across all languages so far. So that does indicate to me that there are songs that we're not really aware of. 37 songs released in other languages, right? So songs that are specific to certain regions, certain kinds of songs. And the project is ongoing, gradual release, and it'll eventually have about 375 hymns. And the book, the hard copy printed version, will be available in 2027.
Excellent. Rebecca, thank you for bringing that to us. Folks in the live chat, and also those who watch this after the live showing of the show, if you'll put in the comments, one of the things I think that's interesting with the hymns is to look at the new hymns, gauge sort of any little soft shifts in doctrine or theology. I think they're there. And if any of you have come across that, if you'll put that in the chat or in the comments, we'd love to know your 2 cents about what you think these hymns mean in terms of taking some things out, putting some new things in. Amazing Grace, I think, is a really easy one to point at that shows something happening. But thank you very much for that story. Moving from the hymns back to the temples and back to these steeples again, and you've got some temple updates for us.
Yeah, I have a huge one here. This is
so does that
breaking
temple.
news. Yeah, had we not had a cross on Temple Square, this probably would have been the lead story. So was it last week or the week before, or I just talk about it all the time, the water being pumped out of the Heber Valley Temple, right? And I know I talk about trees and water. Everybody's probably getting really bored of the stories that I bring here. So, but it's very relevant. So I received some pictures from some residents there as they are starting to dig, and already, what do you see there, Bill? Water, right? And the resident I talked to said he thought maybe they'd gone down like 10, 12 feet. I talked to my engineering friend. It's possible that they're striking water even sooner than they thought. And that would, of course, change, they'd have to pump more, all of that, because as we talked about last week and the week before, they're going to have a below ground baptismal font. And because of that, they are eventually going to have to continue to pump up to 300,000 gallons of water, pumping and also dewatering through a gravity system a day. So 300,000 gallons of water a day. And that's not all the millions during construction. So here's the water already. I was just kind of so disheartened to see that. And some might say, well, why can't they just have a above ground baptismal font? Then they wouldn't even have to do that. And we do know a lot of temples that do, have one, or maybe it'll be underground like 6 inches symbolically. But this temple is special because it is a showcase temple. This is a massive temple. It's going to be opulent. It's going to be a destination temple. The main purpose of it is girls' camp, which is located just a couple miles away. And part of girls' camp now, wasn't when I was in girls' camp, is to attend the temple. One of the days of girls' camp, they usually drive the girls, 20 minutes down to go to one of the Provo temples. They want to have a giant showcase temple to take those girls to during girls' camp so that they can have that, special significance, all part of it. And this is why they're not going to budge on this. And this is just going to be a massive, opulent temple. So I saw these pictures and I put out some information on it. I was getting kind of sad. Here we go. And then suddenly, oh my gosh, I was at Costco and I got a message from one of the residents that said they have halted construction. And you all know how horrible the reception is at Costco, right? So I'm walking around like this. I'm going, what? I was like, what is this? Because the judge ruled everything can go ahead. There's still a lawsuit that's going to go in front of the Supreme Court. But the judge says, no, you can start building, even though the lawsuit's still on the table. Hence the pictures of the water. So I was really excited going, oh my gosh, what is happening? I finally ran out into the parking lot. In fact, I had to do that 3 or 4 times. The lady who was manning the front, she finally goes, you don't have to show me your card. I see you running back and forth. I'm like, I'm a podcaster. God damn it. I have to. Anyway, it was a pretty funny moment. But so here is kind of what's going on. It says Judge Jennifer Mabee on September 19th said that the Heber Valley Temple construction cannot proceed until the legal controversy over it is fully settled. So this does have to do with, like we reported last time, the Supreme Court of Utah said, yep, we'll hear this case. We will hear the residents' concerns about the building of this temple. She granted an injunction against the Church of Jesus Christ requested by the Heber residents who are opposed to the new temple. And it's a smart thing to do. Like she says, granting the stay or injunction ensures that if and when the temple is built, it will remain so and not be subject to an order requiring its destruction and removal. See, this is what happened in Cody, too. They continued to build. They did that stealth groundbreaking, but the Supreme Court ruled with the church and said, yep, keep building. Had they ruled a different way, the church would have had to take everything down. So Mabee sided with the county and the church in July, saying they could go ahead. But now she's saying, let's just put a stay on everything. And the case is headed to the Supreme Court. Now, since her July ruling, the work has begun. As we saw there, pictures of construction, and the neighbors have asked her to stop the construction until the court makes the decision. And unbelievably, she said yes. They said, the lawyer for the residents said, if this temple gets substantially built during the presidency of this appeal, how do we remedy? How do we go in and then ask for the church to tear it down? And he said he wanted the judge to preserve the status quo, which is no construction as long as the appeal is ongoing. Now, the attorney for the church said The first words out of Mr. Mansfield's mouth, that is the attorney for the residents, were, "We need to preserve the status quo here." And he then mischaracterized the status quo, because from the church's point of view, the church has had the right to build for a long time, but has delayed kind of in deference to all of these court proceedings. So here's the interesting part. It says, Jordan said the court could require a bond from the residents if it is granted a stay. That means that the residents would have to put up the money, that the church is going to claim that they're going to be losing by not being able to build. Delaying the temple by up to 18 months would add between 7.8 million and 11.4 million to construction costs. "We have the right to build the temple," said the church's lawyer, "not build it next year. We have the right to build it today." But maybe disagreed and said, and the lawyer said that possibly the church is going to ask, for the injunction to be overturned, and the residents just have to post a bond of $10,000. But this is interesting because did you catch that? 18 months? It could be a couple years before this even goes to the Supreme Court. And right now, the church is not allowed to build. Now, they could ask for that to be overturned. That might be something. And it's possible, I don't know if it's true or not, they could be asked to put the ground back the way it was, right? Fill in that hole, fill up that water. So I don't know what's going to happen, but it's interesting that in this case, unlike Cody, the judge said, yep, no building until we sort this whole thing out. So we'll see.
I'll tell you my 2 cents here. First off, forever, the church has been able to do whatever it wanted with temple building. And when people, I think there was a temple in California in like the 80s or something, where there was some ruckus about it. But for the most part, the church could keep all of that quiet, sort it out maybe locally. Those days have come to an end, and it's gotten so bad now that even in Utah, where you think the church would just have a free pass to do whatever the hell it wants, because it's always had a free pass to do whatever it wants, that suddenly, even in Utah, it is running into problems with local citizens, with local governments, when it tries to just do what it wants in ways that don't seem like they're quite on the up and up.
Yep. No, you're not wrong. And in fact, what we're seeing, I know that Generally Unquotable, who's an amazing reporter and has great access to news, she showed a town council meeting. I think it was the Springfield, Missouri Temple, or it was somewhere in Missouri, where the person who went up to address the town council would not give the name of the organization that he represented. It was just a religion. And they kept asking, who are you representing? Well, it's just a religious organization. They are not even saying their name in some places. So that is fascinating to me. I don't know if it'll make a difference, but so yeah, here's the little post that I got in Costco, a temple with a stop sign around it. But again, they will build this eventually. This is going to be an opulent, spectacular showcase temple. And I think it's interesting, if you notice, it seems like temples are divided into 2 different classes. There's this kind of a temple, which is just going to be temple to the stars. Several general authorities and apostles own land and have houses right there, actually in the neighborhood that's protesting the temple. So, this is the destination. And then you have smaller temples, like say a Cody, Wyoming, or, something like that. And I even predict maybe even another class of temple that's, is more like a meeting house. I think they're going to have to pivot in order to build as many temples as they have announced. Now, I've calculated it. They can only build about 6 to 8 temples a year. So just like always, nothing has changed because it's so centralized. And I've talked to different architects that have worked for the temple before. They're like, yep, everything has to run up the chain of it's so centralized. They cannot, scale this. So in order to perhaps, maybe 10 temples or something a year, which still would take 30 years to finish the ones announced now, not even counting the ones that they're going to announce at conference in a few weeks. I think maybe they'll start putting out temples that are extremely meeting house-like. That might be an answer to just kind of, especially in other countries, kind of push things through. So it's fascinating to watch the church pivot and try to solve these issues. But 200 temples announced, only 28 built. There's a backlog forever.
Yeah. Another issue that the church has to solve is some publicity issues that it's got going on. I'll just note here in the next story. Thank you, by the way, for bringing that to us. And I know you always start off these stories, Rebecca, by saying people are probably tired of these temple updates. I don't think so. I think people really enjoy these temple updates, and I think it's fascinating to see how the church and what it wants to do and what it wishes it could do unquestioned out in the world and even in its own backyard in Utah, and what the local citizens and governments are doing when they start to realize that something isn't right. And so, folks, I'd love it if you put in the comments what your thoughts are, but I'm going to guess that most of you are deeply appreciative of the news that Rebecca brings us over the temples. In terms of publicity, and I think we've come to understand this, out in the world, those folks who are analyzing Mormonism see a church that's having a really bad moment. It's doing things where it just doesn't look like it's a healthy church acting on the up and up. In this opinion piece, and I'll just note that, but this will be important because the next piece, which is the opposite, is also an opinion piece. In this opinion piece, Robin Shoemaker argues that Mormonism is undergoing a crisis of identity and membership in the U.S., driven largely by cultural shifts, social media dynamics, and growing ex-Mormon movement. He cites recent data showing that Mormonism's growth rate has dropped sharply from 4% annually in the U.S. to under 1%. And we've all seen that. Meanwhile, the church, to its members, keeps telling everybody how much it's growing. It's bigger than ever. It's growing faster than ever. It's as strong as it's ever been. Something doesn't mesh here. And that fewer members are active in the church. That's what the data says. Schumacher suggests that digital platforms are amplifying the stories. I know of one new digital platform. It's a weekly newscast. So there's one of them, amplifying stories of those leaving the faith, which in turn accelerates broader disillusionment among younger believers. The author frames this as more than just a membership issue. It's a challenge to the perceived authenticity of the religion. For Schumacher, Mormonism's doctrines, practices, and public image are being questioned in ways that demand more than defensive responses, calling instead for introspection. Theological clarity and engagement. He implies that how the LDS Church responds to the critique, sustains belonging, and reinforces accountability will determine whether this moment becomes a turning point or a deeper fracturing of its community. How the church responds to criticism, how it handles the lines it draws about whether you belong or don't, and how it reinforces accountability, not to the members, by the way, to the leaders, will determine how Mormonism comes out of this moment and fares going into the future. So this was the Christian Post, and this was Mormonism is having a bad moment. Now, to some degree, this is anecdotal, right? This is just Robin Shoemaker adding an opinion piece, but at least Robin pulls some data that says the church is in decline. When I turn over to the Deseret News, they've got an article that is a perspective piece or sort of an opinion piece. Online influencers aren't accurately representing Latter-day Saint reality. And this is, thought I had the name here. Yeah, Jason F. Wright. So Jason F. Wright is the author of this article. This was published on the 20th, so 2 days ago. Obviously, influencers creating this was the money quote from the article. Obviously, influencers creating this kind of content have a right to express opinions. As they respectfully share their concerns and experiences, they deserve to be seen, heard, and loved. So I just want to note that first sentence, not the first sentence in the article, but the first sentence in this quote that I took from the article. That's kind, and I appreciated it when I read it. But then there's that word that always indicates something different's going to be actually said, and it's that good but word, but they represent only themselves, not their peers, and certainly not a worldwide religion. Now, I'll just note, those of us in this space, we do represent our peers because we're the ones who have taken it upon ourselves, that's on us, but taken it upon ourselves to speak in a way that represents a group of people in the community. And we know that we represent them because they're here in the comments and they're agreeing with so much of what we say week to week, episode to episode about the things that we put out. So to some degree, we do represent our peers. It says they only represent themselves, not their peers, and certainly not a worldwide religion. What about traditional media? Those who report on the church broadly or specifically on these influencers have a responsibility to paint a more complete picture and to treat the church's sacred traditions and customs with the same respect typically extended to other religions. Yes, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is wrestling with many of the same issues as other religions. I'll just note, it's also wrestling with 1,000 issues that are very different than other religions, many of them having to do with the truth claims and contradictions within its history. But they are wrestling with the same issues as other religions, and better serving young people is a priority for faith leaders everywhere. But suggesting that today's Exmo content creators are representatives of all young Latter-day Saints might be tantalizing, but it's not the truth. And I agree there. These influencers might be leading a religious movement, but they're not leading one. Well, they're not leading a religious movement. They are leading a movement. And it's a movement to shine a light on the facts and the experiences of those who have been disenfranchised by the faith, and trying to shine a light on what the facts are in the history and what people's experiences have been that have been harmful or painful to them. And Jason doesn't seem to want to touch that with a 10-foot pole. What do you think about these two pieces? That there is lots of recognition in the national media in various places. And even within our faith, when we look at like the Widow's Mite report, pointing at the church declining, and then you've got the church pushing back in spaces where really only the members are going to read it, the believers are going to read it for the most part, and pushing back at that narrative, saying that, no, that's not really happening. Everything is great here.
Yeah, well, they certainly have the money to create an ongoing Mormon moment, don't they? And they've always wanted that, the Mormon moment. And we see this all the time online. Oh my gosh, the ads and the influencers and the new faithful podcasts. It is just an insane world if you're tracking it. And they have the money to influence SEO. They are out there. But the moment also means, that people are curious about Mormons, and they're able to Google that. And pretty quickly, you can find some things that the church may not have wished that you could find. They wish that they could kind of steer you over toward their narrative. And so a lot of people, not raised Mormon, they don't have all those triggers, they don't have all those biases. They're able to just look at Mormons and go, oh, okay, I get it. And that makes it difficult. I know faithful members look at it and say, I think the Secret Lives of Mormon Wives are kind of like a flashpoint right there, because a lot of people maybe on the post-Mormon side will say, yeah, I know faithful Mormons that are like that, or I was like that. And faithful Mormons will say, there's no way that has anything to do with us. So, it just amps up the dialogue to the nth degree. And at that point, all the money in the world can't buy how people will react, or what they're going to find out, or what they're going to learn, or how they're going to interpret it. So you cannot control the narrative as far as you would like it to. And they always say there's no such thing as bad press. I don't know that that's true in this case.
Yeah, they can buy it so far, right? They can pay influencers to create content with very well designed parameters for what that needs to look like. They can do those kinds of things. But as lots of the data says, there is an exodus happening today. Now, while the exodus is happening today, it sounds like maybe there's a rapture tomorrow. So our next story here, what's going on? Tomorrow is the rapture, Rebecca.
I totally forgot it was the end of the world till somebody reminded me right before the podcast. So I made this slide. For a while now, this pastor in Africa has been preaching and warning everybody. Jesus appeared to him in a vision and revealed the date of the second coming, or the rapture. And it's the 23rd. It is tomorrow. So you probably, stay up late watching TV. You don't need to go to work. If you can get something delivered by Amazon faster, than midnight, you can max out your credit card. Tomorrow is the end, right? But I have to say, I give him credit for actually stating a hard and fast date, right, Bill? Most of them are really vague and they get a lot of attention for just somebody that Jesus visited that they know. He flat out said, his moment in the sun is till tomorrow. And then he's either a hero or he's a zero.
Somebody wants to know which time zone is he saying, just so they can be prepared.
Oh, you know what? I never even thought of that. Where is he? I think he's in South Africa. Yes, South Africa. So, and there are probably other different time zones there, but you're right. It actually could already be here. Oh my God. Right now, cut the power, right? It's like...
This is interesting. People do make predictions of when the end of days will come. The Mormonism I grew up with was adamant that we don't know. Only the Son of, only God knows when the second coming. Even the Son of God doesn't know. At least he didn't until he was resurrected and ascended back to the Father. But that's not really true with early Mormonism. When you told me you were going to share this story, I went and found a few quotes. I'm going to make this a little bigger, and I'll take us off the screen when we get to that bottom one. But on February 14th, 1835, Oliver B. Huntington recorded in his diary that Joseph Smith had said that, quote, God had revealed to him that the coming of Christ would be within 56 years, unquote. The official history of the church records the same false prophecy. From that point on, the saints fell back on the vain hope that if it not before then, at least no later than February 14th, 1891. And I had done research into this. Lots of leaders after Joseph Smith, Brigham Young, Wilford Woodruff, that kind of thing. Several of them were still preparing for this moment that was going to happen. So there's that. From this point on, the saints fell back on the vain hope that if not before, then at least no later than February 14th, 1891, all would be well in Zion, unquote. In 1886, the Millennial Star quoted Apostle Moses Thatcher's statement that the time of our deliverance will be within 5 years, the time indicated. And he was speaking to the Joseph Smith prophecy. When someone brings up this prophecy, the apologists will often point to the fact that it was just recorded secondhand in a journal by Oliver B. Huntington. But the reality is we have enough other surrounding quotes by other people that point to that being accurate. Mormon writer Klaus Hansen makes this staggering admission. In 1890, there was a widespread belief among church members that Joseph Smith's prediction of 1835, that 56 years would wind up the scene, would be fulfilled. But such enthusiasm was short-lived. In 1903, Benjamin F. Johnson could not conceal his disappointment when he remarked that, quote, we were over 70 years ago taught by our leaders to believe that the coming of Christ and the millennial reign was much nearer than we believe it to be now. Oh yeah, Benjamin F. Johnson, you got to step into 2025 and see how many more things they've said that didn't turn out to be what they said. Anyway, Joseph Smith said more things. I'll just leave this up on the screen for a second. Folks can pause that and read it. I'll move us back behind it for just a moment so that folks can pause that section and read that quote that we were over top of. And then otherwise, I'll just get your thoughts. It's not just other ministers across the world who once in a while step into it doing this. Mormonism did it too. Joseph Smith said there was a moment when Christ would come back, and he did not. I always have to giggle at these end of day predictions. They've been done a million times and they never come about. You are so safe every time going, I will bet the opposite. I will bet it doesn't happen, and it doesn't.
Yeah, but unfortunately, recently, I think we talked about this on the newscast a lot, just this end of times, doomsday, doomsday rhetoric that they say from the pulpit at conference, right? You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what's coming. And it does take its toll on people. It kind of messes with your psyche, especially younger people. That's who I'm always concerned about. And I am over on Faithful social media a lot. And I do see kids saying, should I even think about college, or what about relationships? Will I ever have a family? It really messes with you. And that makes me mad. And I consider it very irresponsible to put this stuff out over the pulpit. And I know it's when you feel that you're losing a grasp, your grasp on, your religion and everything, the leaders, that the fear whips people up, fear drives people back to the pews. But in my mind, it's completely irresponsible, and they know better. They know no one's coming. They know nothing's happening. And to keep up that narrative is just irresponsible.
Yep, totally. Well, we've gotten to the end of the newscast, folks. We'd love to know your thoughts on the stories tonight. So here's the place where we talk about the things we've got going on. Rebecca, what do you have going on this week?
Now, I was actually just noticing, if we're going to end like at 7:15 and we don't have RFM here, that means that we're missing his 55-minute story, aren't we?
We are. That's it.
Yeah.
That's the only difference, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the only difference. I don't know. That's very telling, but it gives us more time to prepare for the end of the world. So let me move forward here to my slide. Okay, I am so excited about this podcast. Is the master plan Jesus land? Okay, this is going to be phenomenal. Do you remember, Bill, those plans that were leaked a couple years ago, back in 2022? Yeah, they're out there somewhere. Does anybody have them? We have them. Has anybody thought to track the things in the plan that have actually happened over the last 5 or 6 years? We did. You are not going to want to miss this. I'm not kidding. If you thought everything was just kind of randomly happening, and I'm just not talking about the buildings, I'm talking about everything that we talk about as far as a shift in mindset, a shift toward mainstream Christianity, it was all in those plans. So you're going to want to tune in. It's tomorrow night, 6 p.m. We've got Unoriginal Jim back with us, and we are going to go through those plans and show you that they really are following a master plan for Jesus land. And one more thing really quick, also tomorrow on Mormonish, unbelievably, we were invited to be on God Awful Movies. Have you heard of that before, Bill?
I have not.
It's this national podcast where they review Christian movies, so you don't have to, right? Like, they are huge. I was stunned. They even ask us, they tour around like to sold out shows all over the country, and they just review movies. So we did what is kind of known as one of the worst LDS movies ever made, Day of Defense. It's about two missionaries that go into a small town that's Christian, and they're arrested and put on trial. And they have to prove that they're Christian, or they're going to be run out of town. You know, it's kind of every missionary's dream, right? That you get to defend your faith in court. So anyway, it's an audio podcast. You can go to God Awful Movies. It's going to be released tomorrow. And it's Landon and I trying to keep up in the big leagues, right? And talk about this movie tomorrow. So it was really fun.
Hey, this actually started off as a book. I owned this book, Day of Defense. And the missionary, of course, you get to pre-select what questions come at you. Oh, and you, of course, pick the questions that you can knock out of the park. Nowhere in here is there deep discussions about the Book of Abraham or Joseph Smith's shift from Nephite interpreters to a seer stone, or all the 1,000 other issues in Mormonism. It's just Christian apologetics and sort of a Christian defense of Mormonism against evangelicals and whatnot. But I loved the book when I was a new member, and I would have loved the movie at the time too, but you
can watch it on Amazon for 99 cents. Anybody can. And I will point out, the book was written, or the movie came out in 2003. The book was earlier than that. Yep. So a lot of the things that the missionary, that the Christian people were saying, you don't do that, you don't believe in grace, I had to explain to the God Awful, movie host, things have kind of shifted, and a lot of things that they're trying to slam them with, Mormons have now moved towards. So it was interesting to see the change there. But yeah, 99 cents. You can own it for $2.99. Go to Amazon, check it out.
There you go. They're excellent. I would have loved.
What about you, Bill? You guys have a lot of stuff going on.
We do. I'll just note this episode, Almost Awakened, picked back up. We just put out an episode on Sunday morning, Opposing Viewpoints. This is just a conversation I have with Teresa where we talk out what happens when the apologist and the critic get engaged in a conversation that has some tension to it. One side's deflecting, the other side has got some aggressiveness and an abrasiveness to them. And we just talked through sort of the psychology of those conversations. I think it was really well received. And so, folks, if you haven't seen that, I'd suggest checking that out on the Mormon Discussion channel. RFM put an episode out this past week where he goes in and talks about chiasmus and puts out his ideas that I think totally deconstruct this as an evidence for the truthfulness of the church. And so please check out the latest episode of Radio Free Mormon. I'm not exactly sure what RFM has planned for Wednesday, but we'll, of course, be on for Mormonism Live Wednesday at 6 p.m. and then Mormonism After Dark Friday at 8 p.m. And I think that's it. That's it for tonight.
That's it. That's amazing. Do you think RFM watched us, or do you think he didn't tune in?
He put comments in the live chat, so he definitely was watching us, and we miss you at Radio Free Mormon, and I look forward to seeing you better on Wednesday. I'll just note too, in the live chat, I'm putting up the links for the donations, and give me just 2 seconds to do that. But I wanted to make sure that we at least talked about that for just a moment. Folks, this show, the Mormon Newscast, Rebecca and from Mormonish and Bill and RFM, the two of us come over from Mormon Discussion, and the three of us get together and we produce this weekly Mormon Newscast. So we're sort of splitting up 2 different channels to get this done. And it would be a huge help to us and a huge favor to us, and much appreciated by us if you'd consider supporting the show. I'm putting up on the screen right now. You've got the donor box, Mormonish podcast, and then you also have the donor box / the Mormon Newscast. You could pause the show right now, type those in. I'm sorry that they're kind of joined together there. I do put a space in, but for whatever reason, when I post it in the comments, it doesn't show up cleanly. But we do have 2 links there where you can donate. Please go to the Mormonish channel and the Mormon Discussion channel and subscribe to both of them. Click the bell so you get notifications when our episodes come out. And we're deeply grateful to come to you every week to bring you the news that's happening in Mormonism. Anything else from you, Rebecca? Otherwise, we'll let everybody go and we'll get out of here.
Nope, I think it's been a great show. There was a lot of news, and hopefully we covered it so everybody understands. And next week, there'll be even more. So we love doing this. We absolutely do.
Yeah. Great time for me. Great time for you. And we miss RFM. We'll see you back here next time, RFM, Monday night at 6 p.m. here on the Mormon Newscast. Bye-bye, everybody.
That's a wrap for this week's edition of the Mormon Newscast. We appreciate you tuning in and sharing this time with us. Keep the conversation going and stay informed on all things Mormonism. Until next week, wishing you peace and joy. See you next Monday at 6 p.m. on the Mormon Newscast.